Thack.
Good morning.
Gil Wright be interviewing today and going over some questions about your background and your service. I see that you were associated with 82nd Airborne.
That's correct.
So did you go straight into the military, into 82nd, or did you wander around in the military?
No, I went straight in after I went on active duty, yes. I went to IOBC, then they called it the Infantry Mortar Platoon Officers Course, which I now believe is the Infantry Mortar Leaders Course, Airborne Jump School at Fort Benning, and then went to the 82nd.
Did you expect to go in the 5 years prior? Or did you expect to be in the military?
No, it was by accident. When I attended the University of Alabama, it was the very first semester there. The draft was still ongoing, but by the end of that first semester, the draft ended. So I hedged my bets and went on ahead and joined ROTC. So in case I did get drafted or I was called out, I'd have the military experience. And I liked ROTC, and I stayed in it. And then when it was time to sign the contract for the advanced ROTC, I did, with the intention of ultimately serving on active duty somewhere in some capacity.
What did your family think about all that?
My dad was proud. He served in the Korean War. My almost fiancée was not excited about that, but when we went in, she was a good Army wife. She as long as I didn't make it a career, that was one promise I had to tell her. When I got out of the Army, I went to law school and then practiced law.
So you weren't a chaplain?
No.
Oh.
I was in 11 Bravo. I was in the infantry.
And you mentioned mortars?
Mm-hmm. And when I first got to division, I was assigned to a rifle platoon for about 5 months, and then when the mortar platoon leader left, then I was assigned the mortar platoon.
And did you say that was some of your schooling was Benning, and then you made it to Fort Bragg?
Right.
And did you go overseas from there?
Not from Fort Bragg, no. We trained overseas, but did not serve overseas.
Those are some of the best trips when you're going for 3 to 6 weeks, and
right,
and you get a flavor of it, and you're glad to get home.
Right. We went to the Jungle Warfare Training Center in Panama for a month, and then the Arctic Warfare Training Center in Alaska out of Fort Wainwright.
Yeah, heard a lot about those schools. And you were second lieutenant. Did you make it to first lieutenant?
I did.
Yes, you did. Okay, so that's great, and particularly for that time. Did you have any special military experiences that you wanted to share?
Fortunately, we didn't have to go to war. We had 2 close chances. In May of 1978, they had the Battle of Kolwezi in Zaire, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. And Contangan rebels that were under Cuban supervisors and military advisors attacked the provincial city of Kolwezi, and they captured about 6,000 Belgian nationals that lived there at the time. They killed about 280 of them. We were alerted, as were France and Belgium. And so the French Foreign Legion, the Belgian Paratroop Unit, and our battalion was Division Ready Force 1. And the way it's set up in division is you rotate every quarter. Your battalion becomes DRF 1. So if there's alert, then we go into the 18-hour sequence where we go down to Green Ramp, we get the beans, bullets, and body bags, parachutes, load up at Green Ramp, and it's wheels up in 18 hours. So we flew to Ascension Island off south of the equator, which is east of Africa in the Atlantic, and that was our staging area. And then while we were staging and preparing for jumping into Kolwezi, the French Foreign Legion and Belgian paratroopers went ahead and jumped in. So after 2 days, we were told to stand down, and we flew back to Bragg, so we didn't have to go.
Similar stories to Cuban Missile Crisis. Friends I knew who were at Fort Bragg and waited on the ramp and waited and then got in the planes and were halfway there and were called back.
Right.
So I think by then they were probably excited to go and then almost disappointed to turn back. But on the other hand, going, oh gosh, that's great.
Well, it was interesting. My company commander at the time was Captain Bob Bearfield, and he was an outstanding officer. And he came walking into the company area. He'd been at battalion. He had this big grin on his face. And I said, "What are you smiling about, Captain?" And he said, "This is going to be the best day for your career." I said, "Why is this the best day for my career?" He said, "We're going to war." And that's when we started the sequence and we got the op order.
So through that experience and your Fort Bragg being a lieutenant and a company commander?
Platoon leader.
Platoon leader. Then how, did that reflect later on into your clergy experience of how you dealt with people and the hard decisions you may have had to make?
I think all my experiences in life have helped form me as a priest and as a lawyer. Working with the men, I love working with the troops when I was right platoon leader and West platoon leader. I developed close relationships with them because we were always in the field, we were always training. And because we were on combat alert 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And Division 82nd is the only division in the Army that's on combat alert throughout the year, regardless of the status. And so we trained at that level, and so you're spending so much time with your men, you develop close relationships with them. So here I was, 22, counseling these young men, and which was kind of an unexpected consequence of being a platoon leader, or being an officer, I guess. And that helped prepare me, I think, in some degree, for being a pastor.
Did the Army give you any training for how to do that?
No. In LBC, an infantry officer's basic course, they taught us basic human relations and how to counsel soldiers, but beyond that, no.
I was a warrant officer, TAC officer for warrant officer flight school, and at my level, I was told not to try to answer the questions, but refer it to psychologists and clergy and that sort of thing. So you might not have had that
we didn't have
freedom
any
when you're out there in the field.
We didn't have any spiritual issues among the men. They were predominantly personal, and dealing with those, and LT, you got a minute. And I didn't solve problems, but I'd help ease their mind, and I think that's part of it too, And they trusted me enough to come speak to me.
What's your most vivid memory of your time in training? I'm imagining jump school or whatever other dangerous, challenging training you had.
Oh, jump school was easy compared to this, but let me back up. Jump school was fine. For the first 2 weeks in ground school and tower school, they prepare you for jumping, and they basically convince you this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'll tell you that every day. And then when you make that first jump, you're excited to get out of the aircraft. Then once you make that first exit and you're in the prop blast and you're twisting and spinning and your knees are in the breeze, you realize they've been lying to me for 2 weeks. This is not the greatest experience in life. But the worst experience I had was we made a night jump, and it was on, Eindhoven drop zone at Fort Bragg. And one of my men, David Zilka, was coming towards me, and at night there was just enough illumination to see the other jumpers in the air. Sometimes there wasn't. And it was a mass attack, so there were about 500 paratroopers in a short airspace. And he was coming in my direction, and the command is slip away, pull away, because you're about to collide with me. And he didn't. And he collided with my chute, and his chute stole my air, and my canopy collapsed, and I was on top of his canopy briefly, very briefly. And then my canopy started to collapse. It lost its air, and so I had to scoot off. And we got on the ground. It was, we had one of those counseling sessions, but it wasn't a very nice one.
Yeah. Hardest part of military lifestyle? Did you say that your family had a military background, or?
My father he served in Korea. That was before I was born.
Oh, okay.
But the only hardship, I guess, was on my wife when we were alerted to go to Zaire, and this is back before cell phones. Whenever we got an alert, like when they seized the embassy Tehran, that was the second time we were alerted. There were no cell phones then, so they turned the phones off in your area. Then the MPs come and cordon off the area so no one could get in or get out. And so I couldn't call Rebecca. I couldn't contact anybody. And so she didn't know where I was. She never knew when I went to work if I was going to be coming home. Right. And so we were literally loading up at Green Ramp. And one of my fellow lieutenants in my company, his wife was an MP. And she came by. And I asked her, would you get the word to Rebecca? And she did. And she called Rebecca and told her and said, Thack's not coming home. And then she said, well, what's happening? She says, well, turn on the news. That Walter Cronkite knows as much as I do. And apparently on the news that night, they showed that we were loading up to go to.
Almost too much news.
Right.
My trick was to just call and leave a message so she knew that I was not the one involved in the incident that day and at that particular hour, that I was safe. Mm-hmm. Because we weren't supposed to call or tell or guess about a helicopter accident. So from all that, it sounds like you developed camaraderie and friendships within the military and the families as a platoon leader. And you remember their names, so you must have kind of kept up with that.
I didn't keep up with them, but they left an indelible mark on my spirit. It was great for me to work with these guys. And you know what it's like serving in the military. I'm proud to have served. I was proud of serving in the reserves after I got off active duty. But you form friendships under difficult situations, and those are, I think, deeper than casual relationships. And you share the same hardships, you share the same issues. It's always too hot or it's always too cold, you're always too wet, you're always too hungry, and it makes it, leaves an indelible mark on your spirit. And so it's easy to remember these guys.
How did you lift yourself up if you were in those hot, humid, tiresome periods of training or pre-combat?
Just the fact that we were sharing these hardships made the difference. I wasn't doing this alone, and we were all sharing it. And my job was to not lag. I had to, keep my spirits up and keep my morale up so I could keep theirs up. And so I would redouble my efforts, especially when it was too cold. When we were in Alaska, I'd never been so cold in my life. But, steel myself to the situation.
Did you have any procedures or good luck charms? Or
everybody did in division.
Yeah.
Whenever I made a jump, I had I noticed when I was in jump school, a couple of the Catholics had St. Michael's medals, and they pulled them out of their blouse. They'd sit there and be fingering them right before the jump. And I asked one of them, I said, what is that? He said, the St. Michael medal. He said, the patron saint of paratroopers. And sure enough, I looked it up, and it was. So I got a St. Michael's medal. So I had that. I'd wear that. I had a Buckeye I carried in my right pocket. And we all had those things because each jump was an adventure, and you didn't know how it was going to end. And so, we had old timers, and I say old timers, NCOs in their 30s, who had multiple hundreds of jumps terminate. Or they get to the point where they say, my number's going to come up. And so they would terminate, which means they go off airborne status. They had their 20 in, and even though this could be a mark on their record, they just said, I don't want to risk it anymore. And so you never knew. So yeah, we all did.
Sounds like you had more than the 10 or 20 minimum jumps.
I had 33.
33.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I wore St. Michael's that my wife gave me, I think, before we got married. But in helicopter, they didn't want you to wear rings when you're pre-flighting, hanging on a kata key or something. Mm-hmm. So I felt good by having that on. And my ring, I would lose it periodically, and still do. Do you recall the ending of your service and how you dealt with the celebration or the sorrowful situation?
It was bittersweet. I was excited about going to law school. I was accepted into law school 5 months before I PCS'd from active duty, and it was bittersweet. I was leaving the mortar platoon. We had a good mortar platoon. We won the Gettys Cup, which is a division mortar platoon competition. And we worked hard for that, did well in that. And so had a couple of men were crying, when we had the farewell party. And like I say, we were close. We were tight.
Well, I suppose when you're on call, that's even more so than most military, because you have to contain that information and not share it with other military or family sometimes.
Right.
So you were at Bragg. Where did you return? Where'd you go to law school? And then
Went to Cumberland Law School at Stanford University in Birmingham.
Birmingham. Okay, so that brought you back. Had you already been from the South?
Yeah, I grew up I was born in Pensacola, and then when I was 10, we moved to Fairhope for 3 years, and then we moved to Gulf Shores, and I finished high school in Foley.
Yeah.
So I'm from the area, and then after I graduated from law school, I practiced law in Foley for 11 years before I went to seminary.
It sounds like your family was supportive, and however your wife naturally wanted you to do something else.
Right.
Did that continue afterwards?
No, when we got out, she was happy. She just didn't like the anxiety of not knowing from day to day what's going to happen. And she didn't have an understanding of what it meant to be in the 82nd Airborne Division until we got there. And she just thought it'd be going to work at 8 in the morning, I guess, come home at 5, but that wasn't obviously the way it was.
As platoon commander's wife, she probably was more involved than she ever would have imagined.
She was. She was part of the officers' wives group, and they were kind of a mutually supporting group, a supporting network as well.
Did you use GI Bill for your schooling?
I did. When I graduated when I went to law school, I got the GI Bill. It was very helpful because it was on my dime.
How did the service change you?
Well, I put it in the words of my professor of military science at the University of Alabama, Colonel Paul O'Mary, and he was a mentor in many ways. And just give you some background on that story. When my senior year, when we signed our contract, or junior year, we signed our contracts, at the end of the junior year, we got basically what we call the dream sheets. This is where you put down which branch you wanted to go into and so on. And I really still was not certain if I wanted to do active duty or just go reserves, because the plan was to go to law school. I didn't know if I go to law school and then be in the JAG Corps or whatever. So I just hedged my bet and I put MP and Transportation Corps down there. And I was the ROTC Chief of Staff for our Corps cadets. And Colonel Paul O'Mary left a note in my box at Toomey Hall, which is the ROTC building in Tuscaloosa. He said he wanted to see me. So I didn't know what that was about. So I went in there, and there was my dream sheet sitting on top of his desk. And I can't say with my collar on with the camera going exactly what he said initially, but he said, "What the is this?" And I said, "It's the branch designation." And he said, "I understand that, but why did you put these two branches down?" I said, "Well, I'm not sure if I want to go on active duty. I may want to just do full, 6 years of reserve duty." And he just took that paper and he just tore it up. He said, "Let me tell you something, Thack." He says, "You're 21 going on 15. And he says, "You're not ready for the world yet. You need some seasoning." And he says, "And you're going to refill that sheet out. You're going to put down infantry is your number one choice, and then artillery is your second choice. And whatever Colonel O'Mary says, you do." So I filled it out, and he says, "Now," and you're going to put down, you're going to go on active duty for 2 years. So I did.
And he made it happen.
Right.
It sounds like it worked out well. Any other life lessons, reflections from that service that carried into law or clergy?
I grew up on active duty to be young and dumb at 22 years old, and you're responsible for the lives of 40 men. You grow up quick. And that probably was the most transforming experience in my life up to that point in time. I've had similar situations since then, but as you know, serving in the unit, you got a man or man up or woman up, whatever the case may be, when you're in the military. And you can't mess around. It's serious business, and you're responsible for the lives of folks. And what you do or don't do can have a negative or positive impact on those people. And even if you're an enlisted person and you're not in charge of anybody but yourself, you're still responsible for everybody else in your unit. So it falls on everyone's shoulders to, be mature, be responsible, and do what you need to do. And that's why I encourage young people that aren't certain about what they want to do when they graduate from high school to consider the military. And I'm proud to say probably about a dozen in the various churches I've served went on active duty after high school and never looked back. They had good experiences, all of them.
Well, Thack, do you have other reflections or comments you want to share?
I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.